Welcome to Burn the Ship. This is the podcast where we connect entrepreneurs with professionals that can help you go all in on your business. We talk to people that have walked the walk, talk the talk, and even more importantly, today has helped other people go through that same experience of trying to figure out how to run their businesses most effectively. So, thank you very much for joining me, sharing some time with myself, sharing some time with my audience. That's very gracious and kind of you, first of all, and
Delighted to
we're
be here.
also yeah, well, we're recording the day before Thanksgiving as well, so that it's extra generous today. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Leo Bottary. I live in Carlsbad, California. I run a company called Peernovation LLC, and I work with peer advisory groups for CEOs and business leaders all over the world, essentially, to help them maximize the value of the experience they have when they come together. But I also take what the highest performing peer groups have been doing so well for so long and how to bring those principles and practices into the teams in your companies also. And these groups are so incredibly powerful. We all learn so much from one another, and I think while sometimes we feel like we're alone in this world in many respects, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to build a business and all of that. The reality is there's whole lot of folks that are going through the same challenges and seeing the same opportunities you are, and it's so terrific when you bring those folks together and see how incredible they are at helping one another. And the generosity, I think, and courage they display in those meetings is pretty profound.
Sure, I can speak from the experience that that is kind of what I hoped this podcast would be. Is not a viral engine for pumping information out there in the world, but more of an encyclopedia that lives on the internet where, should you choose to seek some of these anecdotes, skills, experiences people share with us, that we are this grand bookshelf of content online that is accessible for people. And so I understand the thought process when we interview people. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I have been very, very fortunate to interview some 700 people on the podcast about what they're experiencing. And one of the biggest benefits to me is that it keeps me sane to know that a lot of people are experiencing a lot of the same things that I do, whether it's a process issue or a people issue, or you just have some idea that you're aspiring to execute. It's been super beneficial to me in the 5 years of running this program to know that people, I think, for the most part, experience a lot of the same things with different passions and motivators that drive them to behave the way that they do. So, can you tell me a little bit of a story? What were you doing previously to Peernovation? What was really the impulse for tying into the organizations that you've tied yourself into from a peer advisory standpoint?
Sure. It's always interesting, right? Because it's easy to look back. It's like that famous Steve Jobs commencement address when he talked at Stanford and how you can connect the dots so much more easily when you look behind you. And I think about all the things I did earlier in my career that were actually preparing me for what I do now, but yet had no idea that that's what was really going on. I would say, though, it kind of clicked in for me when I went back to graduate school in 2008, 2006 to 2008. Now, of course, I graduated college in 1983, so it had been quite a long time. And back in 1983, college was very much a solo pursuit. You would sit, you'd be shielding your paper from other people, taking quizzes, you'd be taking notes, submitting papers, and it was very much an individual sport in many respects. Um, Fast forward going to graduate school in 2006, and I'm part of a learning team. And now it's like, whoa, this collaborative learning thing, which would have been called cheating back in 1983,
Yeah,
basically, right? And
yeah.
here we are, we're working together. The point is, how do we help make each other better? And the folks who designed the program at that time, the professors basically believed that we can set up an environment where you will learn most from one another, second from the material that we provide you, and maybe third, we hope you pick up a few things from us. And
Right.
that was their way of kind of recognizing all of the intellectual and emotional capital they had in front of them. And the fact is, they had people with various experiences there who could really contribute to one another and help lift each other up and make each other better. And after having that experience, and now I went to teach in that program shortly
Oh, wow.
thereafter. And I've been an adjunct professor now since 2008, first at Seton Hall and now at Rutgers University,
Oh,
which
nice.
is great because it kind of keeps me connected, obviously, to these new generations that are coming, into the workforce and all today. But it inspired me to take a great interest in Vistage when I was working independently at the time, and a position became available to head up their corporate communications, which is essentially what I did for the lion's share of my career. And so what they did was they brought CEOs and business leaders together to do the same thing as I saw it that we did in graduate school and
Right.
how they could learn from one another. And so, I was fascinated by that. And fortunately, I, was offered the position there, worked there for about 6.5 years. And it was during that time where I was always a student of the craft of peer advisory groups. And as a result, it really kind of led me to, co-authoring a book in 2016 that was basically born out of a rebranding effort that I was leading at the time for Vistage. And truth be told, that when I started the rebranding effort, and I'm talking with CEOs and business leaders all over North America, and most of whom, really all of whom, the ones I was talking to, weren't part of groups. And I would say, well, how do you learn? How do you grow? How do you bring new thinking in your company? To a person, they would say, well, I read books, I have a coach, I hire consultants, I go to events and conferences, I watch TED Talks, some went to executive development programs at major universities around the country, but no one, and I mean zero, were responding with the idea that being in a peer group was even in their consideration set.
Mm.
So it got me thinking, and when I went to the board to report on the status of the rollout, I also shared this experience I was having in the field. And I suggested, I'm not sure how excited you all are going to be for us and what we do and what so many others do in this peer advisory space to be such a well kept secret. Because as I see it, we're trying to sell a Mercedes to someone who doesn't even know what a car is.
Right.
So the idea of the first book was never to be a vanity piece about Vistage or some kind of hardcover brochure about the company talking about how great we are. We actually enlisted and engaged the support of many of our competitors to say, let's write a book about the category. This is our goal. We believe that if we do that, right, the rising tide lifts all boats, that
Sure.
when people become aware of what's going on, then let them choose the group that's right for them, which is all any of us want to do anyway.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
that
educating people about the car, and then your brand stands on its own. So
Yeah, exactly. And so the point being is that book came out in 2016. I wrote another one in 2018, where actually I didn't do 700 interviews. I did 50 in the year
mm,
during 2017.
that's
And I
still a lot.
referred to it as the year of the peer, which gave me my exit strategy from
Oh,
podcasting
cool.
on that at the time. But the bottom line was that I think the obvious conclusion that came from that podcast was successful people ask for help. They don't see it as a sign of weakness. They regard it as an act of resourcefulness. And because of that, they recognize how important it is to, to seek out that help and to help others. And so over time, it became actually pretty easy to build the bridge between what the highest performing peer groups have been doing so brilliantly for so long, and then of course how to bring that into various organizations of all kinds, really. And so that book was written in 2020 called Peernovation. But I wrote a second edition in 2025 because the number of groups and teams had ballooned from about 125 to 800 plus. So
Mm,
now, as you might imagine, you learn a few things along the way, right?
sure.
So I added 5 new chapters. There was much more of a focus on the three dynamics that are important to these groups, and I knew that psychological safety was going to take center stage. Um, the year prior, I had served on a panel with Amy Edmondson, who coined the term psychological safety back in 1999. Harvard Business School professor, obviously, best-selling author in her own right. She's just really terrific. And in the, category of it doesn't hurt to ask, I said, well, I'm going to see if she'd be willing to write the foreword. And
Oh,
sure
wow.
enough, she did. Again, I think she represents that kind of generosity and that understanding of we're here to help one another, which is what I received certainly from the 50 also highly successful people that I interviewed in the podcast back in 2017. But yeah, she was kind enough to do that, and And I'm just really happy both with the fact that she's shining a light on these peer groups and how incredibly powerful and important they are. But also, of course, I just wanted to get that new content out there. And then, of course, I continue to build on that. I'm an opinion columnist for CEO World Magazine. There's over 200 articles there that, quite frankly, are downloadable for free, or accessible for free, certainly without subscription or anything at ceoworld.biz, and people can get all the content they want about groups, teams, whatever. So I feel like we're trying to democratize this as much as possible.
Sure.
Certainly, I have clients that I work with and all that, and that's what kind of keeps things going. But by the same token, I can't serve anyone. I have 13 other certified facilitators now who operate, in 4 continents. But we're none of us, by any stretch of the imagination, can meet the need and the demand out there. So, yeah, that's what we're doing.
Tell me this, and maybe there's been some exchange between the two things that I'm going to juxtapose, but it kind of seems like there's two battles that you're fighting here, which is one of the education on the value of peer groups in general. And I think probably after COVID, especially, you're probably having to fight that battle a little less because people probably, some level of people probably understood the value of collaboration during that time. And then there's also how do I get the most out of this and apply it to my own business personally as someone that's taking part? So tell me, has there been some exchange in the way that you kind of fight those two battles? Are you still fighting them simultaneously, or do you still go back to the idea that educating the masses about the value of the product allows you to put yourself in a position where your brand can stand on its own should it need?
So I don't view it as fighting the battle so much as I feel I'm more swimming with the current now than
Mm,
ever before. Think about the fact that look at the largest CEO peer advisory groups and peer advisory groups around the world. They're growing, and they have been growing, and they've been growing quickly. Also, many other competitors, many other folks have gotten into the space. And I use competitors, lightly in many respects because I'm not sure how much they compete against one another so much as they provide, additional opportunities for people to access the peer advisory group experience and one that is right for them. And I think over time, all you have to do is participate in these groups long enough, and it doesn't take long to recognize that, wow, a lot of the things that we do really well here, I need to be thinking about how I bring those practices to the teams in my company. So I'm finding it to be, again, when you compare 2016 to what we're coming up on 2026, I think it's night and day in
sure.
terms of awareness of what's out there, the availability of it. I don't take any personal credit for that by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's a lot of forces in the world that are, contributing to that. Not the least of which, by the way, is the fact that when you go on LinkedIn, you go into these social media sites, right? That's everybody's highlight reel,
Hmm.
right? I mean, everybody's crushing it, everybody's doing amazing, and then you're looking at your own life saying, "Man, I got challenges, I got stuff I'm dealing
Right.
with," right? Well, trust me, you put any one of those other people in a room, they got all the same stuff going on too, and they all recognize that. And so I think this idea of yes, we can put our highlight reel on LinkedIn, but I think we are much more comfortable being real with one another in this setting that I think affords us the opportunity to do that.
I can agree. I think that your analogy is better of it's like riding a bike uphill for 5 years, and then eventually there's a tipping point where you have to come back down that hill, and it gets dramatically easier just to disseminate a lot of that information publicly. If I may ask, who would you deem to be the most successful peer-to-peer organizations out there in the world, and what is it that they do so successfully?
So there's a number of them. I would certainly, you've got to look at Vistage, which is really kind of the oldest of the organizations that have been in this space. Like YPO obviously runs forums as well.
Mm,
They started a few years earlier, but their core wasn't the peer group experience, really. That was something they came to later. But, YPO obviously is quite large. Vistage is quite large. Those are the two. You certainly have EO, you have REF, you have, Tech Canada, which is essentially
Hmm.
associated with Vistage, out of Canada. You have EGN, in Europe and in Southeast Asia. There's, a number of organizations out there, and I realize I'm just scratching the surface. There's McKay, out of Canada. There's, Tina Stoltz runs groups and has a wonderful practice, out of Florida. Scott McRoberts has, a whole thing that he does for the Virginia Council of CEOs. So more and more of these things are coming up, and I think it's become easier for people to recognize that, wow, put me in a setting with the right people. I think that becomes the key. How do you select the group that's right for you? What are my goals? What am I really thinking about doing? What stage am I in? What are my priorities right now? And how do I get in a room of people that I can not only help them, but they can help me, and you know, we basically make each other better.
Sure. And so, what are the obstacles that you guys still face today? Are you trying to grow more? Is it more of trying to understand, the curriculum of what needs to be out there in the world to really help people with this sort of collaboration? I would imagine that technology is some form of barrier as well as other players in your industry continue to commoditize a lot of the content that they put out there. I would imagine that that sort of downplays the human to human interaction for some people. So tell me, what are the obstacles that you guys are experiencing today, and where do you go from here?
So again, I'll push back a little bit on the use of the term barrier, because think of technology. What does that do? It makes being in a peer advisory group so much more accessible for
Sure,
people who have travel schedules where they'd be an unreliable participant in an in-person meeting. Where if they want to connect with CEOs, not just in their geographic area, but CEOs all over the world, now they've got the ability to do that. So the technology piece of it actually is a wonderful opportunity. I think to your point about curriculum, peer groups aren't just about people coming together to talk about their problems and common challenges and things like that. They're also looking at what's next, what the opportunities are. Back, for example, in the 2008 financial crisis, most companies, most CEOs who were part of groups back then and who thrived through that crisis, not only survived it, will say that that was the case not because they were that much better led or that much better managed than their competitors, but they felt they were better prepared. So think about being in a group where you've got people from all various industry sectors, right? Well, when you start seeing the early warning signs in one sector and you start seeing how it starts rippling through, the economy, it's a little like it's not unlike an earthquake, which hits you suddenly, right? This is a situation where it's more like a hurricane. They see it 500 miles off the coast, and now they're like, okay, we got to board up the windows. We got to do we got to do all the things necessary to kind of weather that storm, and yet also prepare us for the morning after. And I think
sure.
that's what these groups do really, really well. So it's a matter of, I think, these groups, and all of them, I think, really pay attention to what's next and trends. There's obviously a very huge focus on AI and where it belongs as part of the group experience versus how it's utilized within organizations, how we, protect ourselves from AI, how do we leverage it to our advantage, all of these kinds of things. And again, when you think about all of the things that are coming at us, that we have huge generational changes in the workplace. We have, you know, um, you know, a lot of things people are talking about with regard to uncertainty or what's going to happen in the economy over the next several years. You can't, as one person, learn enough and get enough.
Right.
It's kind of like the pace of change is exceeding our ability to learn and to keep pace.
Yes.
So the only way we can do that is we know that we learn better together. I mean, collaborative learning theory has been teaching us this for decades.
Sure.
And being able to rely on one another and help each other becomes huge. And I think it's more important than ever. I just posted an article recently on CEO World looking at 2026 and saying, like, okay, if if you ever were thinking about this, there's never maybe a more important time to become part of a group, to come together with people again that are at, kind of where you are and have the same priorities you do, and come together and help each other learn and grow and basically thrive in this ever-changing world that we're in right now.
Can you help me define the word peer for myself as well as the people listening? I think that when I think of peer, or most of the people listening think of peer, they wonder how aligned do my day-to-day activities need to be with the person that I would deem a peer. Are they connected me within the same industry, or maybe they're in an adjacent industry with me, or maybe they serve the same type of clients, or maybe that, none of those things are specifically relevant to their ability to give you feedback and problem solve with you, or to be able to identify trends that may be dictating the direction of their business moving forward. How is it that you guys define that word peer, and where should I go look to find my peer group?
So when I think about the word peer innovation, obviously it came from peer and innovation. And I think about peer as people of like status, and innovation is creativity realized or creativity kind of operationalized, right? Um, the When you dig into peer, though, what we're really talking about is what is the connective tissue of the group. So, for example, we're all CEOs, or
Right.
we're all part of a certain industry, or we're all women business owners, for example, or we're all solopreneurs, or trying to scale. Whatever that happens to be, that puts you in that position where you become a peer on that level. You're not going to be a peer on every level. I mean, on one
Sure.
hand, your peer, which kind of represents the connective tissue of the group, could include people in their 20s and people in their 60s and everywhere in
Hmm.
between. So, on one hand, you're not peers at all, but in that room, based on what it is that we're here to do together, you're very much peers and very much, Amy Edmondson offered a great, I think, metaphor during COVID when she said, it's not that we're all in the same boat. She said, we're all in different boats, but going through the same storm,
Right.
which I think is really fascinating, right? So every one of us has our boat. Every one of us has our specific challenges and pieces that we go through, things that we go through. And to be in a room with other people that, happen to be also going through that experience, you can help each other a whole lot. I see it, for example, I lead groups from time to time inside of large companies, and where we do everything from bring a cross-functional team together, where we get folks from marketing, HR, IT, sales, operations, and put them in a room. Because what happens in a lot of large companies, right? You get those silos building up, and you've got people who literally don't know what each other does. You have people making changes in one department that impact two or three other departments. They don't do it on purpose, they just don't know, and it becomes a real issue, inside these organizations. And so, on the other hand, I've worked, and I lead groups where I have people with exactly the same job, but they're in different parts of the country. They feel very isolated in a role, very alone in many respects. The only person they have to really talk to about anything in terms of any challenges or what they have going on is the person they report to. And so when you can bring these folks together, on a monthly basis in a confidential setting where they can just dig in and have real dialogue with one another, it's unbelievably powerful.
Sure. Absolutely. I can agree. Um, where do you go from here? What are your goals? Is it I will use my positive words since we're not fighting battles or breaking down barriers. Just where do we aspire to climb from here? I know that you say that it feels more like swimming with the current than ever. So how is it that you continue to transform and push this idea of peer innovation to people and continue to make it more accessible?
I think the current's going in the right direction. I'd like it to move more quickly. I can
Sure.
tell you that.
Sure.
I'd like those waters to start really flowing, in a way where people at an increasing rate start recognizing the power of peers, the power of getting to know one another and to be able to understand and be able to cooperate and collaborate with one another effectively. It's so interesting. It's when you think about it in terms of teams, it's funny because everything, if you take, for example, all the principles and practices and pieces of peer innovation, which would be, a whole nother show, and you actually apply those, it will make you more productive. But guess what? It also improves well being in the workplace. It also reduces anxiety and stress and does so much to make the workplace just like a little bit of a huh, and not,
Mm,
feeling like you're just, getting hammered every single day. And so much of that is within our control. And if we work together and can have those conversations and create clarity among one another and truly communicate so that we can collaborate, it will increase our organizational capacity. And again, I think help us just be a little happier and a little more understanding and forgiving of one another along the way.
sure, I can agree. Well, I aspire to um, be an asset to your mission. I think that I have been such a recipient of all of the value of incidentally surrounding myself with peers, as well as people willing to share their experiences with me, that maybe I have never accurately reflected on the value that has had on my business and my personal journey. Even though I give a lot of credit to it on the podcast, I think that um, I probably have of some of that Pretender series of look how much hard work you put in. Look at all the cool things that you did when um in reality my sales game as a salesperson has been pretty much solely regurgitated sales skills from other successful salespeople, and my understanding of industry knowledge both in my industry and in industries that we service has been solely predicated on people that have been there and done that. So it has been this incidentally, and we're hard networkers. So when we bring on a client or we meet someone that's a viable referral partner, we bring them to groups with us or abilities to get in front of other people experiencing the same things or collaborate. And it's been um, a huge dictator of my own personal success of how much time I spend doing or not doing that. The more time I spend in my silo problem solving, the less things that I do, when in reality, the most beneficial thing to me is to get my finger on the pulse of the people that are using my product, are operating in the business world, think like an entrepreneur, or becoming an entrepreneur. 700 episodes in, I think I've retained a little bit of that stuff. So, Leo, it is very kind of you again to share some time with me, share some time with the audience. I would love to read your book. I also think that people in the audience should probably do the same thing. If you've never reflected on trying to find a mentor or a peer group or people that can, just help you navigate the alone feeling that being an entrepreneur sometimes creates, probably more often than not. I think that there is a lot of value in that. But tell people, where do they find you if they want to reach out to you, if they want to buy something from you, if they want to read some of your material, check out
Sure.
your blog posts?
So our website is peernovation.biz. Of course, you can find most of my articles actually on ceoworld.biz. Now, if you go to the excerpts tab on my website, it'll take you to basically all of those articles, and there's a number of things that are kind of easy snapshots for you to look at. But I would say also connect with me on LinkedIn. Um, would love that, and easy to do. And yes, the book is Peernovation, second edition. It's forged by CEO forums, perfected for teams, and yeah, have at it. And if anyone has questions or whatever, just reach out to me directly and we'll get right back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much again. I hope that you guys listening have found some value in one, the podcast in general, but this conversation. I do believe that the idea of networking and understanding what the people around you are experiencing will make you better at your job with a better understanding. But more than anything, that human connection in our professional lives is oh so valuable. Um, I went probably the first half of my career playing the numbers game and not the relationship game with absolutely no knowledge. I thought I
Mm.
was playing the relationship game, when in reality, I was just getting to my next opportunity without really driving in the fact that I can bring value to the people that I am connected to. The more that I continued to grow, the more that I continued to invest in myself, I found the opposite to be true. That there was value in me being in these rooms, and that it was super gratifying to me to be a part of the personal transition that people in the business world were trying to make, and being an asset to those people. So thank you guys for listening. I will include as much of that information as I can on where to find all of Leo's stuff in the description. And if there's anything else that we can do for you guys, please let us know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you guys think. I'd love to know who you guys want me to interview. You guys have been very gracious with your time listening. And again, thank you, Leo. Thank you for sharing some time with us. It's been very, very kind. But until next time, burn the ship.